Let's start with the problem and where it came from. How did we get into this mess? This emptiness, this lack of intimacy. I'm assuming that you agree that there is a crisis in intimacy.
Absolutely.
How does this happen? How can something so natural get lost? My theory is that it began in the 60s, but I don't know.
It sounds right. I don't know if it happened, if it began in the 60s. It probably always existed to some extent. And maybe the Greeks had the same problems with their hedonistic lifestyle, putting the body before the soul. But that's so ancient. I don't know if we have data on that. But in more modern iteration, in the epidemic form, probably the 60s.
So I've been arguing that sex without intimacy is not only lacking depth and meaning, it's not going to last. When you take the intimacy out of it, it becomes totally unnecessary. There is no real need in the human system for plain sex. There's no such need. Although, of course, the media, Hollywood, makes a big deal about it. But it's like chocolate. You don't need chocolate no matter how much you enjoy it. And because it's not a need, you can't satisfy it. So what's happening, I think, today, from the people that I'm talking to, it's not that it's lacking intimacy. The whole thing is lacking. Nobody's interested anymore. People are just not being physical.
Can you elaborate a little on what it means to be unable to fulfill a desire? Because while it's not a need, it's certainly a human desire. And you're saying that it cannot be met. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, that which is not a real need is like a bottomless pit. I mean, when do you say, okay, I've had enough pleasure in my life? And there's no such thing.
So it can't be satisfactory. It can't be met in satisfactory measure.
Yeah,
Or
nothing.
at least people feeling like I don't have enough, or this is bad, or this has failed.
Right. So if it's a bottomless pit, it shows that it's not a real need. A genuine need, when you attend to it, is satisfied. There's a contentment. But just pure pleasure, like junk food or Chinese food, there's no end. Because it's not addressing, it's not solving the true need for nutrition or whatever it is the body really needs. So the fact that you can never have enough doesn't prove how important it is. It proves how unimportant it is. Kind of ironically. So the tragedy today, I mean, we've moved beyond the intimacy crisis. The tragedy today is that people are just not being physical at all. The average couple, once a month, only because they have to. It's obligatory. That's the end of a civilization.
And that's been going on for a long time. I don't know the exact date, but years ago, Time magazine had a cover story on what they called the celibacy plague in America. And I think the problem is, having lived on a campus for almost 40 years, is that kids on campus think this is what everybody does all day and all night. And so they're living this false narrative, and they're not tethering themselves to anything larger or any deeper truth. And then they get married and then they find out, wow, no, it's actually the opposite. And it's extremely confusing and causes a huge amount of problems.
So I guess we have no choice but to go back to the good old-fashioned idea. Figure out what is the purpose of sex. Why, how, when. It doesn't work any other way, because you can't fool Mother Nature. So, I mean, when people were saying the colleges are party places, people are not serious anymore about education, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Not serious about education is a little disappointing, but these false narratives you're talking about, this is toxic. This is life destroying. So what in the world happened to higher education? Remember when it was called that?
Yeah, I do remember coming onto the campus here, being very, very in awe, having a deep reverence for the academy, of which sadly I've been disabused on a whole bunch of levels. But yeah, but you know, you can always amass knowledge at a later date from a different source. But what we're talking about is something much more profound. It's not the amassing of knowledge, it's the embracing of life truths and values that will guide you. And that is non-negotiable.
And what's really ironic is that now, of all times, when there is so much information to be had, when there is so much to learn, I'm just talking about secular subjects, and now you stop learning? That's really, that is very, very sad. Yeah. So how do we begin to turn the tide on this?
I think you've done that. I think that you've been doing that for decades. And I've been lucky enough to hear you teach for hours. And I have to admit that in anticipation of this conversation, I reread your book, The Joy of Intimacy. And of course, I was familiar with a lot of the themes, but just found it brilliant all over again. But the one thing that I hadn't noticed before, it's very subtle, but I found so profound and interesting, was your very quick reference to the idea of pleasure being rooted in the highest level of our inner psyche. And it seemed to me that that was a very quick reference to a Hasidic treatise on education, actually. And the fact that in the human being, there's the emotions, there's the intellect, there's will or desire, and above that, pleasure. And to me, I think that's so integral to the whole conversation, understanding what Hasidic philosophy means by that inner pleasure being the ultimate catalyst, the ultimate most potent catalyst in a human being, because you could force people to do things with a carrot and you could goad them to do things with a stick, but for them to do things consistently and with joy and buoyancy, it needs to be rooted in that highest level of pleasure. And I think that that's really what you've been trying to teach people for a very long time, that they have to find their soul, because that inner pleasure is being at peace with who you are, understanding who you are, and living that truth. And that, I think, is what people have lost. They've lost their mooring. So everything else is like, it's like an ill-conceived solution to anesthetize the pain of having lost that. And now they're finding that sex doesn't work either.
So that's a profound observation. I didn't even realize I was saying that.
I don't know, maybe I'm reading it into the words, but that's what
great. That's great.
but that's what I saw when again, second time, not on the first read, but the second time I'm looking at this chapter on pleasure and your mention of that. And yeah, you could enjoy spurts of pleasure. You can enjoy bouts of pleasure, but if you're talking about something long lasting, your whole book is about intimacy, about the joy of being one with somebody else and being able to melt into somebody else and they're melting into you. that needs to come from a very deep place.
Yeah. Just talking this morning on the radio about the need for relaxation, the need to be able to relax and be comfortable, whether it's through meditation or whatever other means. Isn't that important? No, it really isn't important. It's just like taking a break from your anxiety. But you can't see what you really need, what you're really being driven by, is the need to justify your existence. You know, an hour goes by and you have nothing to show for it. It's horribly destructive of the soul.
It's anxiety inducing.
Yes. So relaxing is not going to solve the problem. It'll give you a little bit of a break, a breather from your anxiety. But that's not what your anxiety is asking for. It's not asking for a relief. It's asking for contentment. So I think this is the symptom of greatness. You know, there are people who say, I look back at the past year, I've got nothing to show for it. And it's disturbing. Not as disturbing as a person who says, I look back at my life and I have nothing to show for it. But then you have people who are really giants. They look back at an hour, and if they have nothing to show for that hour, they're severely disappointed in themselves. It's unforgivable and won't happen again. And then there are people who every minute, a minute went by and you have nothing to show for it. And that is, to the soul. See, the soul has no business being in a body. It doesn't belong there. That's not its natural milieu. It's only there to accomplish. So every minute that goes by without accomplishment, it's like, what am I doing here? Those are the really great, I mean, beyond imagination. That a moment wasted is unforgivable, not to the body. All the body wants is to be inanimate. Which is really interesting, that the nature of the body is that it's an inanimate object. It's a lump of clay. It just wants to sit. And yet, I don't know how to explain this, sitting is not healthy to the body. But it should be.
Well, it's not, because it's been tethered to a soul. And it's not good for the soul. And that's why a person is called a mehalech, always walking, always going. And that's why we're happier when we're accomplishing things, even happier when we're accomplishing than in the afterglow of what we've already accomplished. In fact, a lot of people feel very let down after they finish a very huge project. Instead of feeling elated, they feel let down, because that's the soul's angst, because it knows it has to accomplish something.
So it gives the psychosomatic idea a whole new meaning. The body would be very well off being inanimate. And sometimes it acts like it, like the couch potato, you know. But because it has a soul, when the soul is feeling the pain of senselessness or purposelessness, it affects the body. So it's really not the body that is hurting, it's the soul's pain being felt in the body. And that's why nothing you do for the body is going to help.
Including relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Rabbi, to take it back to the conversation about intimacy, maybe one way of understanding true intimacy is the most important form of relaxation, is being able to just let go and trusting and leaning into something larger, which is your union, and not having to be on guard and not having to prove anything or woo anybody or wow anybody, but just be. And maybe that's another definition of intimacy.
And it's more than relaxation. It's a true achievement, and it brings great satisfaction. So it's like, I have what to show. I wasn't just relaxing. And that's why I think we also need to connect it to the word innocence. When you're being intimate, you're tapping into the most innocent part of yourself, innocent of agenda, innocent of selfishness, innocent of schemes, or like the snake in the Garden of Eden was shrewd, which is not the same as smart or wise. But when you can get past that, yeah, you can call it it is very relaxing, but it's much more than that. You come away not just relaxed, you come away more innocent than before. So when the Torah says that Miriam was critical of Moshe because he wasn't being intimate after he came down off the mountain, it's not just a physical healthy pleasure. It's a spiritual achievement. So what do you mean you're too holy for this? This is holy. That was her criticism. Holy people don't dismiss any holiness. And this is holiness, so what's wrong with you? And in a sense, God agreed, just that Moshe was an exception. So in principle, she was right. There was just something about Moshe that was an exception. And for him, it was justified. But for your average holy guy, your run-of-the-mill holy guy, no.
That's not holy.
No, it's not.
You know what this reminds me of? For years, I admit I was bothered by the Talmudic adage, "Ishtoi zu beisei," that one's wife is one's home. And it always sounded to my ears like you were saying the woman has to take care of the home, and she makes the sandwiches and she does the laundry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it rankled. But then I tripped over an understanding of this that really changed everything for me. And that is that just like your home, the walls of your home, they protect you because they make no demands of you. When you're home, you could look down your hair, you could throw off your heels, you don't have to impress anybody. And that's what it means to be with your spouse. They are your protection. They are this place where, like you said, it's innocent, where you come back to who you really are and can strip away all the facades, the veneer, all the extraneous stuff. And that's powerful, and it's replenishing, and it's nurturing.
It's home. That word is undervalued. It's a much more powerful thing than love. You can come back to the one you love, or you can come back home. No comparison. Yeah, it rankles when you think a woman is a house.
Right. Or a homemaker.
A homemaker.
Housewife.
Yes. But home, wow.
So when your person is your home, when that's one and the same, now that's the ideal. That's everybody's dream. And that's what I think people are looking for today. That's not what's happening there, because it's like everything's mixed up. What's supposed to be secondary has become primary. What's supposed to be primary is not even on the table. And nobody feels like they're coming home. Nobody feels like it's a safe harbor. They actually feel like it's a minefield.
I think that is a perfect definition of hell. When you come home and you don't feel welcome, that's hell. A soul comes back to heaven and doesn't feel comfortable. Whoa, there's nothing worse than that. I mean, if I can't be comfortable in my home, where am I supposed to go?
But when you strip, physical sexual relations from what it's supposed to be part of, there's no home to come home to. And there's just this feeling of I'm homeless, and there's nothing positive about that.
Yeah. I like the example of when the Israeli team came into Entebbe, where they were holding the hostages, and they eliminated the terrorists. What did they say to the hostages? Imagine if they said, "We came to save you because we love you." It would have been hollow, shallow, meaningless. They simply said, "Let's go home." Ah, nothing more powerful. In the heat of the moment, under the stress of it, they came up with a perfect word.
It wasn't affected. It was true.
They just want to go home. And if coming home is stressful, that's it. You're lost.
Not home. Then it's not even home, because home is where you can feel safe and be yourself.
Where you belong. When you don't feel like you belong where you belong, you got a serious problem. That's a tragedy. Actually, while we're on the subject, I was sitting at a dinner table with a family, and their little boy said something or did something that they didn't approve of, and they let him know it. And the look on the little boy's face told me everything. So afterwards, I said to the father, a table where a family eats has got to be the safest place in the universe. I mean, the home should be. But within the home, if the dining room table is not safe, if the place where you nurture physically is not safe, you're starving your kid. It's got to be completely and totally safe. Sitting at my table, you will never be criticized. You will never be insulted. You will never be rejected. This is the safest place in the world. That's between parents and children. Between husband and wife, the bedroom has to be the safest place. When that becomes a contest, when that becomes a performance, when that starts to produce anxiety, there goes the home. So it's a fascinating thing that in the temple that Solomon built, there was the outer courtyard, there was the chamber, and there was the chamber of chambers, the Holy of Holies, Sanctum Sanctorum. Nobody was allowed to go into that inner chamber. Now, what would they do if the masonry of the structure needed repair? Nobody's allowed to go in there. So they put an attic on top of the Holy of Holies. And in this attic, there was like an elevator car that was enclosed from 5 sides, open only to the wall. So whoever was in there was completely enclosed and not in the air space of the Holy of Holies. So the repairman would go into this car, and they'd be lowered from the attic into the exact spot that needed to be repaired, and he would do his work, and they would lift him up. The attic from which they did all of this is called the bedroom. Complete mystery. Why in the world would that be called the bedroom? There was never a bed there. But it's called Cheder HaMites. So finally, I heard this explanation from a really special guy. He said, because if something is wrong in the Holy of Holies, the place to get the repair, the place that can fix it, is the bedroom.
That's beautiful.
In the entire home, if the bedroom is healthy, the home is healthy. When the bedroom goes down, and that's the familiarity that breeds contempt. It's not familiarity in the kitchen. When you know each other's tastes, that's very comforting. And it's not familiarity in the living room. It's only in the bedroom where familiarity drains the relationship of dignity, of respect, of sanctity. And then it's terrible. Breeds contempt. This is not neutral. This is not boredom. Contempt, that's dangerous.
So I think this brings us full circle to what's going on today, where young people, and then they get a little older, so even older people, never really get to understand human sexuality as this most intense energy that can either wreak the greatest havoc or bring us to the holiest places. So you're describing that room from which repair will happen in the Holy of Holies is called the bedroom, but that's only when the bedroom is connected to holiness. Only then can it be a source of healing and wholeness and health. And yeah, I mean, you said, when did this happen in the 60s? But I know you would agree that it probably happened in the Garden of Eden. As soon as Adam and Chava.
I don't remember that.
No, but this idea of putting, of inverting reality. And at that moment, what was supposed to be external became primary and internal. And what was internal got pushed to the outside, that inversion of priorities. And that's the beginning of this. It just rears its head in different generations and different iterations. And I wonder if every generation felt like, oh gosh, it couldn't get worse than this.
They thought, we know. It really can't get worse than this. Speaking of the Garden of Eden, I always looking for a good explanation. They eat from a tree of knowledge, which is the most wonderful thing in the world, and all of a sudden they're ashamed. What happened? What's the connection? They gained knowledge and now they're ashamed of their body. What happened there? You would think knowledge is enlightenment. Why would they suddenly be ashamed? So it sounds like before they ate from this tree of knowledge, they saw the world as a mechanical place, a wonderful, exquisite machine that God created, because they knew everything. They were brilliant. They knew exactly how creation happened. They could tell you what formula produced a cow, and what formula produced a lion, and what formula produced a tree. So what did they think of their bodies? Oh, perfect, excellent, baby making machines. That's what it's for, procreation. And that was fine. But then they gained knowledge, which means insight. And they realized it's not just a baby making machine. In fact, why does this produce a baby? How? Well, it engages you in your highest faculties, in your intention, in your pleasure of life, in your soul itself. Because what you're doing is reproducing a person, not a body. Well, how do you produce a person? How do you produce a living, thinking, feeling being? So they realized they had so underestimated the body. So now they were ashamed that they had treated the body as just another object in a world of objects. In other words, the knowledge that they gained was a sense of romance. They discovered the soul of the world, where they had thought of the world just as a magnificent, awesome creation. So they developed, a sense of intimacy, which is romance.
That's a really
And
beautiful explanation.
huh?
That's a really beautiful explanation.
And it explains why a baby can come from that. We don't go far enough when we talk about how do you make a baby. The mechanics of it, that's the final step. The original step is how do you take a piece of your life and give it to the baby? What part of you can offer life, not plumbing? That's what they were ashamed of. In other words, they didn't find the body less impressive. They found it far more impressive. And having not made a distinction was embarrassing. You treat your body like you treat a tree? How could you? So they weren't embarrassed to be naked in front of each other. That's very clear from the text. They weren't embarrassed by each other. They were embarrassed, each was embarrassed of their own nakedness. They were embarrassed by how they were treating their own body, like just another mechanical function. So I think this is the whole process of Judaism. In each generation or in each period of history, we discovered something more profound about things that we were familiar with. And primarily, God's investment. How invested is God in his creation? First, we thought it was just whimsical. He was bored, had nothing to do. Figure, let's see if I create a world, how that'll work. Didn't work out so nice, so he left. He went to do something else. And here we are struggling for nothing. And with each generation, we got a deeper and deeper insight into how meaningful, how essential we are to him. And with Hasidus, it just took a giant step. So here's something I really wanted to get to. We're very much aware, I think, we're very sophisticated when it comes to human needs, conscious, subconscious. We've got it figured out. We've got it mapped out very, very clearly. I think we know ourselves very well on a human level. But we're so focused on the functional, even the psychologically functional. You know, if you never hugged and you never held, you don't know what it feels like to be secure or to be loved, so you don't know how to love others. Okay, we know all that. What's the next step? Which really should have been the first step. How do we introduce and explain the idea that we take ourselves way too seriously? In the scheme of things, we are not supposed to be so self-conscious. We're not supposed to be so dedicated to our own well-being. And all this talk about how to be healthy, how to be maximally healthy, how to get the most out of we're going in the wrong direction. It's just leading us into deeper and deeper depression.
Well, that happened in Garden of Eden as well. I mean, parallel to what you were describing, the shame they felt, da'as, right, in Hasidus is the pathology of self-consciousness and self-centeredness and obsession with the self, which obscures your ability to see God in your life. And that caused a sense of shame and a consciousness, a dawning that this body, which is such a holy instrument, could be used in very many other ways. And that caused them to run for cover. So that pathology you're describing now starts at the same time and is intertwined.
Yes. So what is this das business? The Gemara says, more das, more pain. Thank you very much. More wisdom, more pain. On the other hand, what is the definition of insanity? No pain. Sheita eine margish. You can't insult a person who's insane. It takes nothing personal. So there's no pain.
So das is our humanity. It's our connection to knowledge. It's connected knowledge. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us great and what makes us so terrible.
Exactly.
It's our height and it's our downfall.
Right. It is the tree of knowledge, good and evil. It's the best of things and it is the worst of things. But here's, I think, how it works. The function of das is the ability that the brain has, because it is a cerebral activity. It's the ability that the mind has to turn a piece of information subjective and personal. That's a great gift. But if you abuse it, so if you use this ability to make things personal and you apply it to things that are personal, you're crazy. It's like, learn to love yourself. Excuse me, I already love myself. That is not a learned or acquired talent. I am born loving myself, and you want me to add love to myself? That's not what love is. Love is meant to connect me to others, not to connect me. It's like talking to yourself. Excuse me, that's not what communication means. So you have the ability to talk, but don't talk to yourself. You have the ability to love. Don't love yourself. That's absurd. And don't feel connected and personal about yourself. That's your born condition. That's not what Das is meant to do. Das is meant to balance that with the ability to take other people personally.
That takes us back to what intimacy is about. It's about obsessing about the other. And that's why sexual intimacy is called to know in the biblical sense, das.
Yeah.
It's all intertwined. I don't know if it's the Rambam or the Ramban that says that what changed when they ate from the tree was that before the world was divided between true and false. And then it became good and bad, which is subjective as opposed to objective.
Or romance.
Yeah.
So I think that if we really get to the root of everything, to make, I mean, even writing a book on intimacy, it's wrong.
It should be oxymoronic, but it's necessary.
But it makes an issue out of something that is not meant to be an issue. It's like marriage counseling. Don't turn it into a topic. Marriage is life. It's not a topic for a book, unless it's the book of life. Child raising. Let's get together and talk about this subject, this issue called child. Okay, we're already in trouble. In fact, I heard this from a very insightful individual. The Baal Tshuva phenomenon that we're all very proud of. He's a Baal Tshuva, she's a Baal Tshuva, they did Tshuva, they're Baal Tshuvas, the Baal Tshuva movement. It was very exciting in the 60s and 70s, but it had to mature. A Baal Tshuva sounds like an unnatural, specialized, otherworldly condition. You used to be a normal person, whatever that means. You used to be an average person. You used to be part of the mainstream, but then you went off and you became something. Some people will respect you for it, and some people will hate you for it, and some people will think you lost your mind. But the idea of Baal Tshuva means I separated myself from the mainstream and I took on an unusual, maybe even an unnatural lifestyle. That is not Judaism. Keeping mitzvahs, serving God, that's mainstream. That's the nature of the world, the purpose of the world, the reason for the world's existence. That's mainstream. Going off and joining a specialized or exotic group of people doing, yeah, enjoy it if you want to do that, but that's not the way Judaism works. So the same is true with all these, let's write a book on educating children. You're educating your children every minute. Some people educate their children with neglect. That's what you're educating them to neglect. But don't say you're not educating them or raising them. You're raising them. Once you have them, you're raising them. There's no avoiding it.
Everything you're saying is so true, but there is no choice today because so many people lack models for having, for being able to have absorb these ideas you're talking about through osmosis. They actually do need instruction from a book or from classes or whatever medium it is, because you're right that all of these things that we're turning into subjects are life itself. But what if you didn't experience life that way? And by the way, I mean, you must have noted the same thing. I think it's only the last 20 years that people started talking about their relationships with their mothers, their fathers, their siblings. It used to be their relationship was with a friend or a business associate. All of a sudden, your life from a relationship, as opposed to just, no, these are the people that, that's who I am. These are my people. This is what I come from. But that too, has suffered.
Isn't it interesting that there's a mitzvah to honor your parents? There's no mitzvah to love them. So usually we think, some parents are just not lovable. You can't force it. No, that's not why. There is no mitzvah to love your parents because you do. You don't need to be told. Now, that love can make you be a little careless and a little too relaxed. So the Torah says, as much as you love your parents, you have to honor them. Don't become pals. Don't get informal. Don't call your parents by their first name. Loving them would move you to do that. So the love is already there. Loving your parents is like loving yourself, not a project, not a mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to love your wife. Honor her, yes.
Take care of her, meet her
Provide,
needs.
yeah. But there's no mitzvah to love. In fact, loving your wife is the same as loving yourself. It shouldn't even be considered a virtue. Oh, he really loves his wife. Nice. Would you ever say, oh, he really loves himself? There's nothing to admire there. That's just life. So we really need to start at the beginning. And these books that, as you say, need to be written, but they have to come to the conclusion that after all that we've said and all that we've studied, this is not a subject. Just live.
You know,
Get
Rabbi
a
Friedman,
life. Get a
this
the title of the book
idea,
should be Get a Life.
well, that should be your next title. This idea that we naturally love our parents is one that I think is also so lost on so many. And when kids tell me how much they hate their parents, what I really want to tell them is, you're just telling me how much you love them. And because you love them so deeply, and you've been so either disappointed or hurt because of your deep love, that's why you're telling me you hate them. And if they could only understand that, it could help them find their way back and find healing. And that can open up doors to other solid and healthy relationships. But if they don't resolve that disappointment and that hurt that stems from their innate love, which they don't recognize as a default.
Or the hurt comes because they feel like their love was not reciprocated.
And we're not talking
so
about
much and you didn't
unhealthy.
love me back.
Yeah, we're not talking, I mean, obviously there are some very unhealthy individuals, and we're not talking about that. But kids get into fights with their parents and become estranged. And that estrangement is actually fed by the default love, which they just, don't recognize.
Mm-hmm. So that's another interesting thing where the Torah says, therefore should a man leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. Why does he have to leave his mother and father? Because if they had a bad relationship, he's got to leave that. He's got to stop suffering from that hole in his heart. Don't bring it into the marriage. If you had a very good relationship with your parents, well, you got to leave that. It's like if you feed your family, it is not considered tzedakah. Why is that? I worked hard, I made a lot of money, and I'm giving it to my wife. Is that not tzedakah? No, because that's like eating it yourself.
Yeah, I've always tried to tell men when they say they're babysitting their kids that that's not babysitting. But they all seem to think that's babysitting. How is that babysitting?
If you're not getting paid, it's not babysitting.
Oh, okay. Maybe a man has to leave his mother and his father because they're all about nurturing him, and getting married is really the beginning of his having to nurture and pay it forward, as it were.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, if your relationship with your parents was very good and you want to continue that, then you're not going to be available to your spouse. If your relationship with your parents is very bad, you're married to that problem and not available to your spouse, because that never heals unless you consciously let it go. Leave your mother and father. Stop trying to maintain it and stop trying to fix it. So the wisdom of the Torah is becoming more and more obvious. Every word, every expression, everything. So going back to this point, how do we get past ourselves? Every speech, every lecture, every class, it's always about the self. Validate yourself, fulfill yourself, get what you need out of your relationship. It's so wrong-minded. It's just wrong.
Well, I think it's like what you said before. When you're eating junk food, you're never going to get enough. And that's junk food. That's a type of junk food. This absorption with massaging yourself.
Yeah. So what should we do with ourself? This knowledge that we gain from the tree of knowledge, what are we supposed to do with it?
Do something for someone else. Be intimate in the biblical sense.
But what about the self? Ignore it? Squash it?
No, that's how the self actually comes to fruition in the ultimate way, in a way that's satisfying.
When you do that, what are you doing with yourself? Where are you placing yourself?
You're fulfilling what you're supposed to be doing here, which is ultimately the source of the greatest happiness.
So that is myself.
Yeah, but when you stop thinking about yourself is when you can experience that sense of wholeness. When you throw yourself into helping another and focusing on another.
So let's elaborate on that. When you forget about yourself, you're supposed to do that? Is that a good thing to do? And how do you do it?
I
Just
mean,
get distracted?
isn't a sign of physical health when you don't feel any of your limbs? So it should be the same thing psychologically and spiritually. When you don't feel yourself, that's when you're most healthy.
How do you do that?
You just do it. You make a commitment to do it.
So I had this question. Do we simply need to unlearn all this craziness, the self obsession? It's just a bad message. It's totally unnecessary. It's wrong. It's got us distracted. It's got us confused, misinformed. Just stop it. Stop it. Forget about yourself and get a life. Or is there something more that we need to do with this me monster? You can't just ignore it. You gotta. I think what Hasidus does, Hasidus locates that self and puts it in its proper place. You gotta do something with it. You can't just ignore it. So it sounds like superficial reading. Despise yourself. Despise this me monster. Because who are you? Humble it. Make fun of it. In other words, it's not enough to be neutral. You got to really undo it somehow, right? You have to be cured of it. It's not just misinformation. Yeah, the media, took advantage of all of our unhealthy impulses and needs and made a lot of money off it. It's vicious abuse. taking advantage of our weaknesses. And they're brilliant. The whole advertisement world and how they get you to buy stuff. And there's a whole science to, what do you put in the front of the store? What do you put on the top shelf? What do you put on the bottom shelf? Eye level. There's a science to all of this that makes you buy. So is it enough to just stop that? So in Hasidic language, to be mesakin, the Eitz Hadas, is not by ignoring it. You got to fix it. And it's taking 5,780 years to do that. So it's not such a simple, is there a healthy way, a natural way of dismissing the me? It takes a lot of wisdom. I just read somewhere that there's a little girl, remember the details? She suffers from a condition where she doesn't feel pain. So in that department, she's completely fearless. And something happened and she was dragged by a car, or I forget what it was. She should have come out completely, and all she came away with was some scrapes. And the explanation is because she didn't feel pain. So she wasn't frightened, she wasn't traumatized, she went through it and got up and walked away. The reason we feel pain is because of the self-consciousness. Well, this can't be happening to me. Oh, now you're vulnerable. Now everything hurts, everything breaks, everything. But when you're absolutely relaxed, like somebody who's very drunk, they don't get hurt.
Oh, they could get very hurt. And that little girl that doesn't feel pain is vulnerable to a whole different level of danger than the normal kid who's protected by their pain.
True. But what it shows is that a lot of the pain comes from our self-love.
Yeah.
Animals don't suffer the way we do because they're not self-conscious.
They don't suffer anxiety because of that.
Or even self-defense. They defend their lives, not their dignity. And when a human being is physically hurt, the ego intensifies the pain many times. Like, me? You're hurting me? That's worse than the hurt. So a person who doesn't have that me obsession can heal faster, doesn't get sick as easily. Their immune system is much healthier, which proves that the me monster is not natural. It's not healthy unless
you think the sense of self is natural.
The what?
You don't think the sense of self is natural?
There's the tricky part. It's the best of things and it's the worst of things. And how do you separate that?
So is it the acute obsession with self that's the pathology, but the sense of self is endemic to humanity?
So the best explanation I've heard was, of course, there is a self, and that's neutral. The question is, how do you see it? Do you see yourself being for yourself, or is yourself for others? The same as love, same as money. You have a lot of money, it's all for you, then it is the root of all evil. If it's not for you, the biggest blessing in the world. So this self-awareness is for me, to protect me? Not really. It's to give away.
So that takes us back to intimacy. Das being the root of all pathology, and Das being the biblical world for intimacy, for lavishing on the other. So the self in service of the other.
And that's what the self is for. It's not a sacrifice. You're not being noble, you're just being healthy.
And that's when it feels good and satisfying and home.
Right. And that's what's so evil about pornography. Pornography means it's all about me. And that is the most destructive of all evils. It's about me. After that, who knows where it's going to lead? If it's all about me, then why not burn down a store and walk off with whatever you need? It's all about me. So the me monster is really the root of all evil, and it begins in the bedroom. It begins with your sexuality, which today is, younger and younger. Kids have to deal with it. They have to locate the proper setting or the proper context for these feelings and for this. So a spoiled child, an indulged child, a child who feels entitled, is not going to be very good at intimacy. I remember we were sitting somewhere and this mother had her little boy, and the little boy's diaper was very wet and it got very heavy and it's kind of hanging out of his, whatever that was called. And she looks at him and she says, "Oh my God, who's going to want to marry you?" That's looking ahead, looking forward to. But there's some truth to that. At a very young age, if you don't get it right, nobody's going to want to marry you, and you're not going to be able to. You're not going to know how to be married.
So it's the parents' responsibility.
So it's scary, but you look at a child eating and you think, oh no, your poor husband or your poor wife. This is not good. The me monster is out of control. But it's not unusual for a child's me monster to be out of control. That's what parents and teachers and schools, that's what it's all about. You educate, you raise a child to be able to make the best of the me monster.
Channel it correctly.
The good part of it without the bad part of it.
It's kind of like cancer, I think. Like cells are inherently healthy. It's what we're made of. But when they start reproducing to an extent that's not normal, that's when it becomes a pathology.
And it has been said, cancer cells are arrogant. They don't care what any other cell is doing. They go off and do their own thing and swallow up everything in there. Arrogance. The me monster out of control. That's like, I think, Moloch. Huh?
I'm going to have to jump. But this was fascinating, and thank you. Appreciate it. I want to hear about Amalek, and then I'm going to go.
No, that's why you can't rehabilitate a Moloch.
You have to eradicate it. Radiation.
You can't rehabilitate a cancer cell because you can't reason with it.
Okay.
Very good. Hatzlacha.
And to you, thank you. Kol tov. Kol tov.
If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there's a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it. I want to invite you to join us as VIPs, partners in our work, and join us also for a personal chat with other members of the VIP club. We talk about many things. There's an opportunity to ask, to respond, to make a comment, to meet the other supporters. And together we can really make a difference in Jewish life and in life in general. So join us. It's goodtoknow.org. Log in, call, make contact, and join us with the VIPs.